All right. Hello, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here. I'm Jackie Balderrama and senior editor on this most recent issue for 1,000 Languages, issue number 4, and the moderator for tonight's celebration. 1,000 Languages Project is a living, ever-developing database featuring translations of work previously published in Hayden's Ferry Review, transformed from its original English into manifold world languages. I'm very pleased to be handing over the reins to the incoming manager of 1,000 Languages, Cecilia Savala, who will be leading the project this year. But for now, I get to do a kind farewell and celebrate tonight with you all. HFR senior editor Susan Nguyen and our wonderful Piper staff will also be sharing some links in the chat with relevant information throughout the evening, starting with HFR's latest spring and summer issue 74. Later, we'll share links to pieces so you can read alongside. And one exciting new feature of 1,000 Languages is that we've added a directory to the website as well as audio and visual capabilities. So audio recordings are slowly being added, and we have high hopes for what the visual additions will do too. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to all the people who have made 1,000 Languages and tonight's event possible. Many editors, translators, and language reviewers, including faculty and instructors from ASU's School of International Letters and Cultures, have assisted. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Dean of Humanities, Jeffrey Cohen, for his support of the project. Hayden's Ferry Review and 1,000 Languages also acknowledges the 23 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located on the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Acamel, Otham, Pima, and Piapash Maricopa Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. We are making efforts toward equitable practices, including HFR's 2023 Indigenous Poets Prize contest, the recipients of which were translated in this issue into 1 or more languages. I encourage you, I want to thank everyone else also attending today. And we encourage you to use the chat to celebrate what you hear, share moving lines, and reflect. You'll also have the opportunity to ask a question for a brief discussion after with our writers and translators. So you can find that function at the bottom of your screens. And if you need captions, those have also been enabled for tonight's event. Although we'll see if it can pick up all the languages. All right, issue 4, Our Roots, Our Wings, celebrates 7 youth and adult recipients of Hayden's Ferry Review's Indigenous Poets Prize and includes our first Dene translation by Chris Hoshnic, who we'll be reading tonight. This issue also honors the story, both written and lived, of Ashton Lynn Marie Goodman, whose piece Reflections in Brass was originally published posthumously in issue HFR 50. And is now translated into Japanese by Michael McGyver and Spanish by Fabian M. Diaz Chasen. The works of this issue are rooted in the heart, family, homeland, and nature, but they also spread their wings in memorializing loss, in resilience, and in calls for justice. We are delighted to reintroduce these original HFR works and share these new translations with you. And this is the final issue on which I'm serving as supervising editor. So I'd like to express my deepest thanks for all the interns, translators, and language reviewers I've had the chance and privilege to work with. 1,000 Languages has become a dedicated community of students, scholars, and writers around the globe, invested in sharing and supporting poetry and stories in their languages and the languages they're learning. And their commitment and creativity are a testament to the value and necessity for translation. Okay, so I'm going to start off the night with an introduction for our first reader, Emily Dyer Barker. Emily Dyer Barker is a writer and artist with a PhD from the University of Utah in English literature and creative writing. Her poetry and fiction have been published in Juke, Injuked, Diagram, The Master's Review, and Hayden's Ferry Review. Her artist's books have been archived in various special collection libraries. She currently lives in Kaysville, Utah, with her husband and 3 children. Emily's Glossary of a Miscarriage appeared in HFR 63 and has been translated into Chinese, Indonesian, and Spanish. Emily, I invite you to turn on your microphone and share with us.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you to Hayden's Ferry Review for making this amazing event possible. I'm so honored to be reading with the other panelists tonight. Okay, so I'm going to read Glossary for a Miscarriage, and this is written in a glossary format. So you'll hear me say a word, and then there's a text below it. So for me, that format is really important if you want to imagine it in your brain. I invite you to do that. Okay, Glossary for a Miscarriage. Announce. What you remember about your grandma's house is the pinwheels. She put so many along her sidewalk, between the grass and the concrete, such shining, spinning, memorize. Did you miss something? Did you forget? Auscultation. They say it's not possible to photograph the totality of a solar eclipse in any meaningful way. There are too many magnetic ribbons. One frame is not enough. The naked eye cannot be replaced. Bath. Gentle, gentle. Birthday. For a long time, you will know the ages of your friends' sons and daughters, the one born 3 months before, the one born 2 weeks after. Blastocyst. At the beach, you made castles with an equal mixture sand and water. You know the feeling of the good mud sliding through the inside of your fist. How do you say it? You know if it's too thin or if it's too thick, it doesn't work. When it's just right, the wet mud. Look to the northwest, the moon's shadow approaching 30 miles per minute. At first looming low on the horizon, deep gray with strange slivers, red and orange. Driving through a desert into a herd of storm clouds, the rain, the smell, the lightning you saw hit a juniper bush, a round ball of light. Body. Pluto has not cleared the neighborhood yet. It continues hurtling through the solar system. Bow. Think cotton, think pink and spotted, think bending over on the tile floor, knees to chin, curled, knotted, how bright, dark. Cervix. You can look at the sun during totality. It won't hurt your eyes. Clot. Because the moon has a complicated topography, in the path of totality, you may see a phenomenon called Bailey's beads or the diamond ring effect. These occur when the moon fully covers the sun and light escapes through the parts where the moon is slipping away. Complete. Once the bleeding starts, it can't be stopped. It may take 2 weeks or longer for the contents of the uterus to pass. During the brief period of totality, the corona is revealed. This is best experienced with the naked eye. Totality may last as long as 7 minutes, though most eclipses are much shorter. Conception. You'll hear the sound of silk filling with air, a satisfying snap and so much pull towards the sky, a different kind of gravity, a different kind of bright. Cramps. The bottom of the ocean, almost empty. Curette. There's a hole, a blank space, a circle, a space to cleanse. Go, wash yourself 7 times in the river. D&C. No one tells you at 3 a.m. you'll feel attachment slide out of your own body. You will not know this is possible. You will think you shouldn't be sitting on a toilet. It's the middle of the night, and no one has time to tell you whether or not there are cemeteries that will bury these bodies. Embryo. Another beginning. You are about to turn 10 years old. Spinning on the hard wood floor of the kitchen in your house, your dad puts his hand on your head. He says, "Happy birthday. You're a decade old." Expel. It can be like this. Spraying down a horse with Avon Skin So Soft. It helps with the flies, the instructor says. The horse is so tall, muscles rippling and jittering, the coat smooth when you brush the hair this way, but so difficult the other way. Smell of mud from horse urine and dirt, like planting marigolds on a Saturday morning with your sister, your brother close by. The dirt in your family's yard has too much clay in it. The manure helps, but here there is hay everywhere and a horse in the next stall watching you. People are arriving for the next lesson. A dog barks in the distance. It's cold. the night air dark, you can see so many stars. It is you all alone in a bathroom with some towels, a book to read while you wait. You will have to flush the toilet while your husband sleeps. Fever. This flesh happened. Grief. Places where you would prefer this to happen, a river, a lake, an ocean. Heartbeat. Horizon line at dusk, purple sky, blue dirt. Heavy bleeding. Fast, so fast. Loss. The moon's shadow is only a dot, its path of totality a mere 70 miles wide and always sliding off the surface of the earth, the bodies moving so quickly in separate directions. Lullaby. Your little teapot short and stout. Here's your handle, here's your spout. When you hear me whistle something, something, tip me over and pour me out. Membranes. When the moon crosses in front of the sun, you'll see the glitter. Nola para. At first, like a piñata, it's fun to hit it with a bat. But then a dead horse in the sky, bright star, you can't stop swinging. Placenta. Hot air balloons lift off from a field by your house. So much muscle needed to keep them near the ground, near enough for the passengers to climb in their baskets, celebrating so many things. Pregnancy test. You made the pinhole camera with tinfoil, stiff sheets of paper, a cardboard box that came in the mail. It was difficult to only look at the ground. Prima gravida. There were so many girls dressed in shiny light lavender walking around the gym floor, each one with a partner dressed in a tux. It's a party for your best friend. She's not Catholic and she's not actually going to get married, but she is 15. How do you spell festivity? How do you spell dancing? How do you spell jumping up and down to a song that sounds like Cotton Eye Joe? How do you spell the name of the time when everything was a first? Ritual. After making a wish, blow out a candle. Shower. Silk, 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 silk. Tissue. It is not just red, but all the dark colors of the rainbow. Purple, blue, not part of you, but something you are folding and crinkling into a bloom your teacher will hang from the ceiling for the party. The paper, unfolded, translucent, you can see so much through it. The window, the lightness of sky. Umbilical cord. A blood of stars, a pilgrim named La Via Lactea, the darkest shrine the moon casts on earth. You can follow the way over several months. There are many resting spots. Uterus. Pear, sweet and cold. Eat it at noon. Zygote. The envelope is closed. Thank you.
Let's share some love for Emily. Thank you so much. It was such a powerful piece, and I was so delighted that we had 3 translators select that this year, which was very exciting. And yeah, the challenges some of them ran into was some of the nursery rhymes that are quoted in it because it suddenly has it's like a rhyme in it, and the challenge to like make decisions around that. It was interesting to have those discussions, but beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. Next we have Sarah Ghazal Ali. Sarah Ghazal Ali is the author of Theo Thanes from Alice James Books 2024, selected as the editor's choice for the 2022 Alice James Award. She is the poetry editor for West Branch and an assistant professor of English at Macalester College. Sarah's piece Epistle Hagar appeared in HFR issue 70 and has been translated into Arabic and French. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. This is the coolest event, and the 1,000 Languages Project is amazing. And yeah, getting the email that my work was translated was the most magical thing ever. I think this is the first time my work has been translated, and it's just the most special, magical thing. There's a number of poems in the book, my first book, Theophanies, that you can't really see because of the blur, that consider language and I suppose the elasticity of language. So it feels very special to be translated. And especially cool that it's this poem because it's the last poem of the book. It's how the book ends. So Epistle Hajar is an epistolary poem, so it's written in the form of a letter. And it's also a persona poem, so it's written in the voice of Hajar, the wife of Abraham. Epistle Hajar. Agate, alyssum, apricot. Simple pleasures I can still pronounce in this desert. Love's only dominion, the clear, well-walked path to drinkable water. I hesitate to ask for answers, remembering the others forsaken in a basket, garden, well. There's no one left to write to, but I'd tell of the tree, its sweet shade at high noon, the untorn snakeskin I found while digging for wetness in the sand. Against the crude mountains, his turned back, whittled down by my calls. I've learned to call want from wait, to walk until water appears. And then I thought it'd be nice if I read you the last poem in the book to also read you the first one, so you can have a little bookended thing. My faith gets grime under its nails. Qul, say he is Allah the One. I confess to sleeping coiled on my night blue prayer mat more often than standing bent in ruku. Even when I posture piety, I blink steady, lashes keeping count of the hand-knotted flowers fringing the rug rather than God's pristine names. The places I've prayed, elevators, Victoria's Secret fitting room, the muck-slick meadow after rain, will testify for or against me, spilling through my book of deeds in ink of blood or honeyed milk. Qul, say I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind. My faith is feminine, breasted and irregularly bleeding. My faith gets grime under its nails, unburies maybe mothers to suckle them sacred. I believe what I can't leave. I eat hand-slaughtered beef, spared of pain. I laugh about the banyan tree in Khyber, chained by a drunk British officer, convinced it lurched toward him. I pull up a picture online and show my mother the roses planted neatly around it, the rusted shackles no one dares remove. Qul, say I seek refuge with the Lord of Dawn. Once a month, blood roams like mint over immaculate grass. The azan trills from my arboreal center. Though excused, I wake before the white thread of daybreak to open my window, let the angels in to spectate the ache, and erase a sin for every devoted cramp. Lord, you pardon my name. Lord, you pardon my pain. Lord, I parable my name. As best as I can, I'm raising my hands. Qul, say, O disbelievers. I read my charcoal, cup my hands, and blow. I misremember and enter with the wrong foot first. A woman crowned holy is a calamity worth repeating. Eve languished motherless among rotting cores. The sweet stench of fruit flies at last shown their purpose. What wilt, what putrefaction of her will to wonder, I wonder how to hallow the women I've sprung from. I haven't begot a thing but inherited wounds. I can't help but bear what barely belongs to me. Thank you.
Absolutely stunning. Thank you so much. Let's share some love for Sada. So beautiful, and the images are so at once like deeply gorgeous and haunting. So thank you. Wow. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to transition to translators. Beatrice Szymkowiak is a French-American writer and scholar. She graduated with an MFA in creative writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts and a PhD in creative writing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She is the author of Red Zone, Finishing Line Press, and a poetry collection, as well as winner of the 2017 Omnidon Single Poem Broadside Contest, and the recipient of the 2022 Ata Shahid Ali Prize in Poetry for her full collection, Birds, published by the University of Utah Press in 2023. Her work has also appeared in numerous poetry magazines. Welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you so much, Jackie. First, I have to say that it was such a wonderful experience to be part of this project, and it gave me the opportunity and the honor of translating three remarkable women poets. So thank you for letting me be part of this project. So I did translated your poem, Sarah, in French. So I will read it in French. And you wanted me to talk a little bit afterwards about, maybe the process of translating it. So I'll get to it. But first, the poem. Épître, Agar, Agathe, Alisson, abricot. Plaisir simple que je peux toujours prononcer dans ce désert. Le seul domaine de l'amour, la clarté, du sentier battu jusqu'à l'eau potable. J'hésite à solliciter des réponses, me souvenant des autres, abandonnés dans un panier, un jardin, un puits. Il ne reste personne à qui écrire, mais je raconterai l'arbre, son ombre suave, à midi. La mue intacte du serpent que j'ai trouvé, en creusant le sable en quête d'humidité. Sur fond de montagne brute, son dos tourné, élagué par mes appels. J'ai appris à séparer le désir de l'attente, à marcher jusqu'à ce que l'eau apparaisse. So, to talk a little bit about, the translation of this poem, and maybe, the two other poems, I always look first at the context of the poem within, a larger work, or also here, it summon also a story from the Bible, which I was not, as familiar with. So I had to acquainted myself with the story of Ajar, and a story of exile. And what I've noticed about the poem at first is there is a kind of sparsity in the syntax in the word, but that makes each word weigh even more. So there is an amazing diction in this poem. So I wanted also to keep that. So when you have all those pieces that you try to, and I wanted to keep as much as possible the line breaks. So I really try to go towards that, keeping the language, the attention to language, the simplicity of it, and keeping the line break, which, is not always easy when you move from one language to another one, which, for example, clear became clarté, which is a noun in French, but then I kept that word just at the end, and we had that clarté, the clear just, at the end of that line. So it's just a wonderful poem. And what I wanted to say is, like, sometimes some poems that might seem shorter and maybe more simpler in terms, the syntax, are sometimes the hardest one to translate. And the one by the other one that I translated, Blood Sausage, was the same. It looked, it was an anaphora poem, so there was a repetition of a same, there is, and it seemed super, maybe a very simple structure, and it was the hardest poem to translate, actually. So, but what a pleasure to be able to dive into these poems and to try to convey them through through language. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Yeah, it was lovely having you reach out and translate for us. We have independent translators, of which Beatrice is one of them. So so thank you. I was thrilled to get your email.
Thank you.
And your beautiful work. Okay, next, we always have new additions to previous issues of Thousand Languages because it's a living database. So we're constantly adding to issues 1, 2, and 3, as well as, the newest issue. And that's the case with our next presenter. Fabian Diaz, hailing from Venezuela, is a senior student at Arizona State University dedicated to earning a Spanish degree. Fluent in Spanish and English, Fabian serves as an intern for Thousand Languages Project, specializing in the translation and editing of various literary genres, including nonfiction, fiction, and poetry from English to Spanish. During his leisure hours, he enjoys hiking, traveling, experimenting with new recipes, and indulging in music. And I think Fabian has graduated, so congratulations, Fabian. Fabian couldn't be on camera today, but is, I think, in the audience in transit. So I'll be sharing 2 pieces of his translations via video. And one of them happens to actually be my own poem. It's for the sort of gap I wasn't at ASU qualified to be published in HFR. So I thought to just give it a little context, since he'll only be reading the Spanish, I'll read that poem very briefly in English for you, and then play the video for Fabian. All right, so the poem is called Self-Portrait as Minotaur by me. When I charged, my sisters fled and were faster. Pattering feet on the brick path, rustling orange trees. I guess you could say it's dark in here. Holes for the nostrils and eyes do not align, so beams of light dart in like bioluminescent fish, the space hot and pressed onto my shoulders. When I try on this old head, I enter a dark house. Every room may as well be the same without colors. In my own home, I try to learn watercolor, to cook dinner. I can't tell if it's wreckage or finished. My husband brings me offerings of flower petals. Should I devour them or just inhale? I'm trying to disprove assumptions about the monster, the always eating, the appetite for sex, the disappearing acts. So doing, I cannot pose with food or recline in bed, any gesture mistaken for a feeling of or chasing or aggression. I do not know what to do with my hands these days. Bullfighters practice with training carts, the bull's head at the prow of a wheelbarrow, and the person not so much inside steers from the back. In this hollow, never knowing if I'm alone, I can only stand still, sway my weighty head from side to side until the world is spinning. So I was delighted and put no pressure, I might add, on Fabian or anyone else to translate my poem. But I was delighted that Fabian did, and I will share the video of him right now. All right. Do this. Well, let's see. I might have to reload it. Okay, let's try reloading real quick. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Oh, of course. Okay. Apologies. 1 second. We have the passcode. and our wonderful editors. I'm just crossing my fingers, can cut this out, and then I'll have that on the recording.
Hello, my name is Fabian Diaz. I'm an ASU alumni. I graduated last year. My major is in Spanish. Before graduating, I did an internship at the 1000 Languages Project magazine. It was quite an adventure. It was really, really challenging, but I would say that I had the time of my life just learning from Alberto, Jacqueline, and all the translators and reviewers. It was really fun. I'm going to read today two pieces that I translated into Spanish. One of them is Postales Francesas by Alberto Rios, and the other one was written by Jacqueline Valderrama. Give me a second. Where it is? It is. Okay. So this one was written by Alberto Rios, French postals, o postales francesas in Spanish. Esa oscuridad de la noche, pensamos en ella. Cuando pensamos en ella, la noche se convierte en cualquier cosa. La apertura que un hombre da de su abrigo en algún lugar lejano, lo que significa que no puede suceder aquí mientras intenta mostrarnos postales francesas. El hombre curioso que mantiene su abrigo un poco para él y un poco para nosotros. Necesita la oscuridad para su trabajo, para su lugar en el mundo. Pero lo que nos muestra allí, en los bolsillos, en los recovecos de la tela de su abrigo, en su noche, las estrellas son las postales francesas. Y son justo lo que pensamos, desnudos tras desnudos, lo que significa nada más que desnudez, y la desnudez en su interior es todo, nada más que cuerpo, huesos, piel, pero en llamas. And the next piece that I'm going to read is Self-Portrait of Minotaur by Jacqueline Valderrama, o Autorretrato como Minotauro. Cuando cargué a mis hermanas, huyeron y fueron más rápidas, pies chapoteando en el sendero de ladrillos, susurrando en los árboles naranjas. Supongo que podrías decir, está oscuro aquí. Los agujeros para las fosas nasales y los ojos no se alinean, así que rayos de luz se lanzan como peces bioluminiscentes en el espacio caliente y presionado contra mis hombros. Cuando me pongo esta cabeza vieja en esta casa oscura, cada habitación bien podría ser la misma sin colores. En mi propia casa intento prender acuarela, cocinar la cena. No puedo decir si es un naufragio o está terminado. Mi esposo me trae ofrendas de pétalos de flores. ¿Debería devorarlos o simplemente inhalarlos? Estoy tratando de refutar suposiciones sobre el monstruo, el comer siempre, el apetito por el sexo, los actos de desaparición. Al hacerlo, no puedo posar con comida ni reclinarme en la cama. Cualquier gesto malinterpretado como huida, persecución o agresión. No sé qué hacer con mis manos. Estos días, los toreros practican con carros de entrenamiento. La cabeza del toro en la proa de una carretilla y la persona no tanto dentro gobierna desde atrás. En este hueco, nunca sabiendo si estoy sola, solo puedo quedarme quieta, balancear mi cabeza pesada de un lado a otro hasta que el mundo esté girando. Just thinking about all the translations that I did last year, I took 6th grade, meaning that I was working basically 20 hours per week. So that's what I said, it was quite an adventure. But just to think about how do I do my translation, how my process is, I usually what I would like to do is just reading over the whole thing, just to have like a whole idea of the things that I'm going to translate into Spanish. And then the second time I would like to ask myself before reading, again, I'd like to ask myself some questions back in Spanish, which is interesting. And then just to see if I can answer those questions while I'm reading it. or trying to translate it like in Spanish at the same time that I'm reading piece. And then I do like a third time, which is basically for me looking for slangs and idioms in English, or those sort of phrases in English, and just to see if they have like some kind of meaning in Spanish, because some of them don't have like any sense in Spanish, so I have to figure it out a way to to keep the essence of the phrase or the slang or the idiom in English, and then just put it into Spanish, if that makes sense. Sometimes there is no way to do that, so I would like just to, what I really want to do is just to keep those phrases in English, and just to put out like a footnote, like, well, in English this means yada 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 yada. Because sometimes I think that it's actually nice to preserve some phrases and slangs and idioms in the original language. So that's how my process goes. And then also when I'm working with reviewers or editors, I'd like to not only work with native Spanish speakers, but also people non-native Spanish speakers, because they learn differently than native speakers. I mean, speaking about how they learn the language, they have like a whole different picture or perspective of how to translate into Spanish. So sometimes I found myself just like kind of defending the language from them, but at the same time I was like, well, I think they're right. Even if we say this in Spanish and it sounds natural, it's like sometimes not proper. So if I'm doing this work, which is for a magazine, so I would say that I would put it like in the most proper way possible. So it was interesting actually working with the editors and reviewers. I worked specifically with one of my best friends, Alejandra. She's been in the US since ever since she was a kid. The way that she speaks both languages is kind of broad, and it's, I don't know, it was amazing just hearing from her how to translate things. Then I had an argument with her. I was like, no, I don't think you're right. I'm going to talk to someone else. So I spoke to my sister, who actually helped me during the process too, because we were like arguing about how to properly say something in Spanish. And then my sister was like, I think your friend is right. And I was like, oh, Jesus. But that is, it's one really nice thing about working with, people from different backgrounds, from different experiences. And it was quite an adventure doing this whole project for 6 months. So it was really nice to meet all of you.
All right. And I'd also like to add that Fabian was like a translation powerhouse. He translated 13 pieces, and these were not short. Some poems for sure, 1 page, but poetry also can prove very much a challenge. But in addition to some fiction pieces that were over 10 pages. So yeah, we're incredibly lucky to have Fabian as a translator and language reviewer. Emily Dyer Barker's piece, Glossary of Miscarriage, he served as a Spanish reviewer for the translator on her piece. So very delighted to have Fabian on the team. All right. Thank you. All right, next we have Chris Hoshnic. Chris Hoshnic is a Dene poet and filmmaker with a BA in English from Arizona State University. Hoshnic has received fellowships from UC Berkeley Arts Research Center, Dene Artisans and Authors for Capacity Building Institute, and Native American Media Alliance. He has been a recipient of Hayden's Ferry Review's 2023 Indigenous Poets Prize. Hoshnic is currently an MFA candidate at Institute of American Indian Arts. And Chris is in a special position to not only be reading his original work, but also his self-translations, because he was published in HFR, awarded an Indigenous Poets Prize, and fun enough for us, actually working on translation or 1,000 languages at the same time. So we're delighted to welcome Chris. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm actually going to the poem that I wrote for HFR. It's actually pretty long, so I'm only going to read just a very small portion of it, and then a very small portion of the translation, and then move from there. So I'll read the English translation first, and then the Navajo translation. So the poem that was translated is titled "Land is a Body is a Religion." The mother throws the umbilical cord from the body to the east on sovereignty. But in the west, the body is feral. The remains larger than 10 US states. It is a domestic dependent nation under Supreme Court or Indian reservation, interchangeable, where citizenship is taxed. All right, and that is the first, I guess you could call it a stanza of the poem, and I'll read the first bit of the translation as well. And this one is titled Nahaka Diyan Amma Bawe Bitse Ha'a Jo Ayilhan Nahago A Jo Etzis Abadzid US states Nezna Aki Etzis Do Hanani Bawe Di Nahohadstan Nichinale Beetso Lijin Do Da Ago Indian reservation Nezgizago Inahagi Bichin Dioltra. All right, and that was the translation of the first, I guess you can call it a stanza. It's kind of broken up into strange structure for the poem. But for Land as a Body as a Religion, I turned to George Lankoff's classical theories of language, where a metaphor was seen as a matter of language and not thought. The generalizations governing poetic metaphorical expressions are not in language but in thought. They are general mappings across conceptual domains. So in short, the locus of metaphors is not in language at all, but in the way we conceptualize one mental domain in terms of another. So as an example, for this specific piece, I've actually been treating translation very uniquely. I've been tackling it from a place of cultural metaphors. And so Lankoff's theory is that our bodies are shaped around metaphors. An example of this would be what's at stake. Understand. These are things that we're not actually doing with our bodies, but they are how we have shaped our language in English. And so I thought I would do the same in Navajo and kind of lean a little bit more close to the cultural metaphors that were present in that language. For this specific translation, I saw that the word Supreme Court was not present in Navajo per se. Some can argue that there is, but in Navajo, I actually took that term and I visualized what that would look like. And I did our grandfather's coats in black. And so that's how I kind of tackled this translation versus how I would have tackled it prior to studying Lankoff's theory. And so, yeah, that was kind of my experience with the Navajo language for this second time around. I did do I did my first translation with Once a Wife, Always a Mother by Wendy Thompson. Given that Dinepizad often places the verb before the noun, I imagine the structure would serve kind of better flipped for that. But however, the reversal of the lines found the poem's language to be kind of a little bit more unorganized. And so an example of this is Doyenis. I took the place of the I was a wife. And the rough translation for Doyis does not cook was a little bit different. It was a strange tackling of it. I had to go through many different kind of quote unquote lexicons to kind of figure out what that looks like. The word couldn't was existing in that poem. And so I turned to my father and he pointed out that couldn't was the key word in Thompson's piece. And so from there, it was kind of just tackling what the cultural metaphors were like, how we can move around those, and then make sure that the translations are in service of the speakers and not necessarily for English speakers, or the speakers of the Diné language and not English speakers. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the other poem you translated into Diné. This is also the first time we were having, and I think certainly not the last, the first time we had an indigenous language translation on 1,000 languages. So I'm so glad that you did that for us, and yeah, could share about it too. So I've shared that one in the chat as well. We have time for some questions. So I encourage you all to use the chat to ask questions of our writers or translators. I'll get us going for just a little bit. So I'll invite Kalar to change us over to gallery mode so you can see at least those of us who have our screens on. And we'll ask a few questions. Really excited to have you all here. So let's see. Yeah, ask those in the Q&A. That'd be great. All right, so I'll start with some questions to our writers. And Chris, you kind of fit both categories, so feel free to answer this with Emily and Sarah, or you don't have to. But I'd be interested to know, as writers, at what point you think about audience in your writing practice, whether you start just writing for yourself or have an audience in mind, because I'm just thinking about how the audience, in a way, has expanded now that we have people of other language abilities welcomed in to hear your pieces too.
I can kick us off. I always think this is a really hard thing to talk about because on the one hand, it feels like if I think too much about audience, I'll never write anything authentically from my own voice because I'll be so preoccupied with, I think, reception. So I think trying to distinguish between publication and reception and actually who is the poem on the page speaking to or addressing, that's the sticky thing for me. And I think if I'm thinking about like a true audience for work or for my work with Epistle Hodger, I think the real consideration of audience is just in, I guess, familiarity with the lore or the biblical and Quranic story that it's drawing from. And the nice thing about living in 2024 is that you can find all this information online, so that kind of eases some of the anxiety. But I think audience really comes in for me after I feel like I've finished a draft, and I'm somewhat satisfied with it in terms of it getting to some ineffable truth for me personally. And then once it's on the page, once it exists for me, then I kind of step back and give myself a little bit of distance and think, well, what is this going to do in the world? Is this something that I want to go from private to public? And if so, what contextual clues need to be there, what will help other people make sense of it, and is there enough in the text that this can stand on its own and people can take it, look things up, use a dictionary, things like that. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Jackie, I have a little response. I think normally when I write, for me, writing is super performative. So like the placement of the words on the page is really important. And even like the shape of a paragraph can be important. And I think mostly I want to say to my readers, like, look at this. But I think working on this piece, Glossary for a Miscarriage, it was also performative, but I also wanted very intentionally to put more language into something that doesn't have very much language. And I mean, it's done in a pretty wild way, but I do think that's something very cool about writing and other forms of art, is that it can be really dynamic with the artist or the writer and the audience or the reader, that something can be created across that space of putting something into the world and then the reception of it. I mean, that's my hope as a writer. So.
Chris, did you want to add anything, or I can jump to a question for translators too?
Oh, what was the question again? Sorry.
No worries. It was kind of like about audience, and at what point are you thinking about audience during your writing practice? Because like as work is being translated, right, that audience is expanding in terms of like access, right? But I think just at the point of creation, like where does sort of thinking about audience come in when you're creating poetry or fiction?
I always think about form, I think, when I think about audiences, because I think that's what dictates how it's going to be read and how that's going to be reached. But for the Navajo translation, it was the cultural metaphors that kind of kept that grounded. But also the caesuras and the original piece was more prominent for me in that translation. I wanted to respect the caesuras when reading it, because I wanted the cultural elements, the cultural metaphors to stand out as images, really stand out as images, as opposed to sentences, as I did in the first translation, the first go around in the writing. Because in the first go around, it was a lot of legal language. And so it was tackling how can we almost make that land-based and animalized language in a way, because that was really where the word Diné really comes from. And so it's really retrained my brain on tackling poetry with images in mind, and kind of having the back of my mind, I have Sherwin Bitsui kind of like really kind of hitting the back of my mind. You don't need those words, you just need the images, and the aesthetics of those images was more important to me for the translation. And that's how that I think that's how I found it to be more important.
Yeah, I also know it's like when you originally wrote this piece that was accepted for the Indigenous Poets Prize, you didn't anticipate like that it would be translated or that you would be the translator, right? So it's like you kind of give yourself the challenge, maybe like an earlier you than the translation you. But I'll welcome Beatrice into the conversation, and Chris can contribute to this too if you like. Gregory Rabassa said that translation is essentially the closest reading that one can possibly give a text. And I'm curious, like, what was something you appreciated about one of the pieces you were translating? And after having read it so much and worked with it so closely, and maybe how that impacted some of the decisions you made. But yeah, what you appreciated and how that decision process came about.
Let me think a moment on that question. I think what I really appreciated about actually the three pieces that I translated was, the form, and it's in poetry, it's the form and the message, the meaning are very much entwined. And so it's always a balancing act between between wanting to keep a certain an element of the form of the initial poem, and also still create that message. So it's tricky. Poetry is in translation is very tricky, and what I love about poem is often, so you have the visible part of the poem, which is the form, and the poem happens mostly outside of itself in some ways, and it's to be able to in translation to keep that dynamic between the form and the meaning, and so for example, in the poem by Joegi, Blood Sausage, there was the anaphora, and so it started with, I have it actually here. There is a flower opening, there are smells, so it's just, kind of a litany there. And as we go through the poem, it becomes more intense, and a kind of a picture of fresco starts to build up. And that was a very much a challenge to get to there. And at some point, she even uses words in English that are very uncommon, even in English. And I had to figure out how to translate. It was the husband, wife, and the husband man. And I wanted to keep the, that idea of that weird idea of, because there's also ideas of gender in that poem, and that was very difficult to come to a solution, for those words. And I don't know, I probably got lost in your initial question and my response to it, but like yeah, it's a challenge. Translation is a challenge. As a poet myself, I learn a lot from being such in a intimate relationship with a poem, and try to figure out its inner workings, and I think I learned from it. So it's just, for me, it's such a privilege.
I really appreciate you saying that, and like coming back to content and form working together, and both of those being thought about in the process of translation. Chris, did you want to add anything about kind of, I don't know, you were translating a few pieces for this issue, and like, I don't know, something you appreciated after having sort of lived and breathed the poems you're translating?
I think I learned a lot more about poetry than I did about than Navajo, which was kind of weird, because I thought it would be the other way around. Was when I think about these poems, and I think about content and form, I think about Ophelia Zepeda's poem Rain. And she has a translation of it in the O'odham language too, where she has the structure completely different in English, and she has it in another structure in O'odham. In her heritage language, the poems completes the first two stanzas, or not two stanzas, broken into two sections, with a whereas the English is structured very, very differently. And so I think about that, and how the form will inform the language of the poem. And so it's really got me thinking about how important that is. And then how, and this other thing that Layli Long Soldier has has said that it's like form and content are like wheels on a bicycle. And if one is flat, the bicycle can't move. And so, yeah, I've learned a lot about poetry in such a weird and strange way. And I feel like I'm still in the same place that I was a year ago with Navajo. Because I thought I would use it as a tool to learn it, but I think I've used it more or less as a way to separate the two languages from each other. I think I've learned that as well, about not only myself, but myself as a language, as a poet, and then as a speaker of the language too. And then there's this whole idea with, I think Spanish speakers have this too, is where they say that their Spanish is not the right Spanish, and I feel like my Navajo is not the right Navajo too. And so when I go back home to the reservation, there's this idea of, I kind of close down, stop talking Navajo, and then refrain from using any of the words. But it was interesting. But now when I go back, I'm listening a little bit more. I'm hearing that how people are constructing sentences, and then I'm hearing how they're adverbalizing words, and it's interesting how you're listening more.
I really love that. The listening more, and then the form and content like a bicycle, Lily Long Soldier's quote. Quotation, I hadn't heard that before. I really love that visual. We do have a question in the chat, so I'll read it. It's a little long, so if I'm able to copy paste it, I will too. In translation, there's the idea of the translator as a present writer in the translation versus the translator as a vehicle for the language to be received. I'm wondering how you think about your role in presenting what was in the source text in a way that the new audience will experience it the way you did. Oh, and Kayla was kind enough to drop it in the chat. So I'll let you kind of digest that a little bit, and whoever would like to respond may. So this difference between the translator as a present writer in the translation, or like a vehicle for language. Yeah. Great question though. It's a tough one though. Yeah. I mean, essentially, I think it's asking like, what metaphor do you use for thinking of yourself as a translator? Like one of those two, or maybe even something different, you know?
I think I can kind of formulate something. I think I return to Gerald Katz's theory on effability, and how that every language has a sense, and that this sense can move between languages. And if there is no sense, there's nothing human about it. And so this is what makes human languages different from like communication between other animals. And so in that way, I think there's something universal in everyone that we all experience. No one experiences grief specifically differently, and no one experiences happiness differently, or language doesn't dictate that. And so I think it's just finding the universality in that language, and then trying to move it into the other language, and then trying to construct new language around that. For me, it was, again, the Supreme Court, and then the word nation. There's no word for nation in Navajo, so I took the word Mother Earth, which is essentially the rough translation, or our mother, or our, I think that's what the translation was, our mother. And so I took that in place of that. But now looking back on it, I'm kind of thinking like nation is not really encompass that, but it gets the meaning across, I think. And so that was my reasoning for we're going about it with cultural metaphors in Navajo specifically. And I don't know, I think what do other translators, what are they thinking?
And maybe I can try to speak to that. For me, the translation, so the the text translated, is in some ways that when a reader reads it, it's my own experience of the poem. If you want, the translated text is my experience of the original text in some ways. And I don't think it would be, I don't think it's possible for a translator to escape, putting something of ourselves in it, even if we would not want to, because we experience the original part, and that's what end up being that translation. It's our experience of it, our experience, not only emotional, but our experience in terms of the words, the literary part, the syntax. It's our experience of that poem. It's it's complex question. It's the conundrum of the translator.
No, but I love that too, because it's like you can have multiple translations of the same piece, and each of them might have their own special way of seeing it too.
Yeah, and I think it's each a different vision of the original poem in some ways.
We have just a few more minutes. If there's any questions or thoughts the writers would like to ask the translators or vice versa, I'll let you all be able to do that too. Then maybe we're at a good point. All right. Well, this has been so delightful. Thank you so much for sharing your words, your translated words with us. I feel like this project in many ways has like challenged me in so many great and beautiful ways and brought me in connection with so many people. And I foresee 1,000 Languages continuing to be able to do that. And tonight's just been really lovely to be in your presence and hear your words and hear them in different languages too. So please all be sure to check out issue 4, 1,000 Languages. I believe there's been 20 pieces translated. So this was just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you'll find there. We really appreciate you being here with us and wish you all a beautiful night. Let's have one more round of applause, virtual or in the chat. Thank yous to our guests. Thank you. And I'll just stay here until Kaylor signs us off, but we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.